it's not been much said about it. It was talking about assassins in general, that there are 3 countries in the world that lead in assassinations as a national phenomenon, and you'll never believe who they are. Unless you read the piece, you probably know. But they are Tsarist Russia, Japan, and the United States. This is a peculiarly American institution, and we are the only country in the world, by the way, among the major powers that has what they call the lone assassination. A man who, if he doesn't get a job in the post office, will kill a president, and this happened in the case of McKinley. Or was it Garfield? I believe it was Garfield, wasn't it, who was killed by a man who was very irritated that he did not get the job that he thought he should have gotten. So he just went down and shot the president, as simple as that. Perhaps this is because Americans, and in part and parcel, it might be one of the more evil byproducts of the democratic system, that the democratic system often not only fosters individualism, it not only fosters things like idealism, but it also fosters selfishness. That many people confuse license with liberty. That some of the statements that were made over the past weekend shows this very definitely, that many people will confuse the fact that because I am not getting what I want out of life, it must be the fault of the system. It must be the fault of some rotten person. And we have a tendency in America to narrow issues down to one man. We love to do this. We believe in personalities. We don't believe in ideas so much. We don't believe in abstractions. We believe in one man. One man caused it to come about. And so, naturally, it follows that there would be people on the far fanatical edge of violence who would believe that if we remove that man who is responsible for these bad things, well, then it'll straighten out. It'll straighten out. Just believe it. This must be a terrible thing for a president to have to face the fact that we believe here in America, and it comes up in any election, that if we elect the right man, somehow all of the problems that are dogging the nation will be taken care of. That it's looking for that right man, that right man. Well, what you're doing then, of course, is ignoring the fact that many of the problems that face America and face all peoples all over the world are not necessarily solvable. They really are not. And if they are solvable, they can only be solved by that long, slow, grinding passage of time and evolution. This is a very unpopular idea, and one that could easily get you shot if you mentioned it. But nevertheless, this is faced by every president. And it as Mr. Kennedy said in that broadcast, broadcast that he did on the second anniversary of his administration, he said, the facing of the facts is not always easy. He said, most people can get away without facing facts. He said, most people don't have to deal with them. He said, most people only have to deal with making a speech or writing a book. And he said, but the president has to deal with the facts. He has to deal with the facts that large numbers of congressmen may not believe in his civil rights bill. Now, what's he going to do about that? Well, he has to face that. He has to deal with it. Whereas the guy who draws the cartoon, the man who does the funny bit in the nightclub, the guy who writes the editorial, rarely has to deal with facts. Because, you see, by Monday, after he's drawn his cartoon Wednesday, he will be dealing with another issue in his cartoon. He just leaves the last one and goes on and on and on. Whereas the president is left with it on his desk. He's left with that problem on his desk. And it must be a terrible situation to realize that many people do not understand the office of the presidency that much. Now, I feel that the belief that we have in the president sometimes transcends our understanding of a human being. I also believe that our belief in a president often precludes totally the judicial system that is the lifeblood of the democratic process. Hitler used to say, and I hate to bring in such a terrible name, But one of the things that Hitler said about democracy, and this has been said by almost every totalitarian leader, is that democracies cannot do things fast enough. He said that democracies get bogged down in arguments, and in the meantime, they're liable to go down the drain. He said that is one of the big problems. He said they're not organized. Well, that's true. And one of the beauties of democracies is we don't go off half-cocked. We don't rush out and immediately enact 17,000 laws, which 6 years later we may regret, but there they are. People do argue back and forth, but slowly but surely those wheels grind. And they grind in such a way that eventually, good, bad, or indifferent, they arrive pretty much at a workable situation. Now, I think Mr. Kennedy, the late Mr. Kennedy, represents a rare thing in this world. And I think that the thing that he represented will become increasingly rare as our world gets more and more abstract. He represented a realist. He represented the man who looked at both sides of the facts and looked at all the facts and then said, well, let's see what we can do. Considering all those situations, we'll do the best we can. Now, this is a very unpopular type of person in our time. Because today, more and more, we are beginning to believe in passion as a substitute for reason. Passion will take over, and we'll often find ourselves writing books, even we'll find ourselves doing cartoons. We'll find ourselves doing nightclub bits based on a passionate feeling about an issue, and totally circumventing reason, and then using reason to justify our passions, which is a very dangerous situation. Now, I'm not saying here that passion is a bad thing. I'm merely saying, however, that the minute that passion begins to be believed in as always a good thing, you wind up with assassinations, which are, by the way, crimes of passion. I think another one of the dangerous snap judgments we make is whenever a thing, like when this terrible event occurred, just an unbelievably serious and true event suddenly happened. I was appalled at the number of people who automatically formed a snap judgment as to what side or what part of the political spectrum was responsible for it. It's interesting to note how quickly they did that the statements were made about this thing. Never realizing the facts of this kind of fanaticism, that they very often don't even have any genuine political basis. That I think there's something growing in this country that is neither left nor right. It is the growing me-ism. And it's a new kind of a political force. It's the new militant apolitical man. He is militant in his righteousness, who feels that he is right, who feels that he is more moral than all other people, who feels that his inherent beauty has caused him to transcend these poor people who believe in one system or the other. Now, this is perhaps a new kind of anarchism that's growing, but eventually I have a feeling that in a few short years it will become a genuine political force. We see labor leaders, for example, who do not have the slightest concern for the American system and for the American economy. They're concerned with one thing: me and my union. We find big industrialists who are doing the same thing. We find certainly many persons and many pressure groups, both on the left and on the right, who feel this. Well, eventually, this slow drifting away from a concern for the entire structure or fabric of a society will eventually result in a very, very difficult spearhead of evangelistic me-ism. But Mr. Kennedy, I think, will go down in history as a martyr. I think he will go down in history as eventually, when all the facts are in, he will go down as a man who was, during his 2 years and few months in office, was largely misunderstood. that the very things he stood for were the very things that the hippies, the people on all sides, accused him of not wanting to come about, or fighting, or not doing enough, or not carrying forward enough. But this will take history. I would love to read now, tonight, what history will say about Mr. Kennedy in 1980. Not so much from the accomplishments of his short, very brief administration, but from the things, the repercussions, and the ripples and the slow circles that his largely frustrating 2 years and 10 months meant to the nation, and what it really meant symbolically as far as the entire democratic process was concerned. I don't know. I don't know whether anybody really has learned by history. Somebody during one of the broadcasts said, well, if there's ever a time, I think it might have been Earl Warren who said, if there's ever been a time when we should learn by history, this is a time. But there was a slight sound in his voice that said he didn't think we would. There's a great possibility that that's true. But I looking at that broadcast and watching the broadcast, I hate to use that term, but looking at the events, feeling the events that we've all felt in the past 72 hours, feeling these events, watching them occur before our very eyes, was probably something which most of us, even to this very minute, do not really, in our deep inner, admit to ever having actually happened, ever having actually occurred. Pretty hard. You know what I'm trying to say here? And maybe this is one of the reasons why, very quickly, within the next 3 weeks, we will almost totally forget Mr. Kennedy. I suspect this might happen. We might totally forget practically the event and what it meant. But nobody can quite remember anything more completely moving. I'll never forget, and I hope few Americans will ever forget, the sight of that open grave. It all seemed so simple and so little. Did you have the feeling of great sadness? There was just this little grave. Like everybody else's little grave. Somehow when they were saying they were going to Arlington, you had some feeling of great monuments or something, but they took you there, and here it was just this little simple grave. And it was just a hole in the ground, really. And there was this little simple bronze coffin, and there was a quick shot which they cut away from. I don't know whether you saw this or not, but it was one of the most poignant shots of all. There was a little moment after the funeral party had left Arlington, and the cars were winding back up the drive over the bridge, back over the river to Washington, and the 4 soldiers were still standing guard over the grave. You saw coming down from the lower left-hand corner 2 workmen. Did you see them? Dressed in overalls? Just 2 workmen with baseball caps, and they were coming to do the inevitable. And there was a brief shot of them. They walked up, and one of them sort of kneeled down, and he started to pick things up around the grave, and he's beginning to do what happens to all of us in the end. And they cut away from that very quickly. Maybe this was too much. But I saw that for that instant, and I thought, my God, how small we are. And even the president is no more nor different from us. And maybe this was one of the things that was so profoundly moving and frightening and at the same time vaguely reassuring, and it gave us all a sense of unbelievable loneliness. Maybe this is why people rushed off to football games, although that's probably being kind to them, because I believe I wonder whether the British would have considered having a professional soccer game in London the day after the king died. I doubt it. We're a different kind of people. And this is not to say good, bad, or indifferent. We're just very different. And sometimes you wonder just what kind we are. Well, it was a terrible weekend. And I'm not so sure that we're not in for a few more in the next 100 years. This is Gene Shepard.